She tumbled through the snow, her bridal gown shimmering in the cold, and he leapt just in time to save her from the icy ground. She was falling, her white bridal gown catching the pale light, fluttering like fragile wings against the icy gale. Each step she took on the slick ground betrayed her balance, and before she could regain it, the snow swallowed her up. Her hands clawed at the frozen earth, grasping for something, anything, to keep her upright, but the ice refused to let go. Then, out of the whiteness, a shadow lunged. A man's strong arms closed around her waist, yanking her back to her feet with a force that made her gasp. The cold air stung her lungs as her heart pounded like a wild drum, but in his grip, she felt something terrifyingly warm, safety, at least for now. "Hold on," he shouted, his voice barely cutting through the roar of the wind. He planted his boots firmly against the icy ground, eyes scanning the horizon like a predator hunting prey. "I've got you." Her hands clutched his coat, her fingers trembling as she tried to steady her racing heartbeat. "You saved me," she whispered, disbelief and awe mingling in her soft voice. Snowflakes clung to her dark hair, melting slowly against her skin, leaving tiny trails of cold water that ran down her cheeks. He gave her a brief, almost imperceptible nod, his gaze darting around the snow-laden streets of the abandoned town. The wooden buildings stood ghost-like, their windows frosted over, shutters rattling with the wind. This town had once been alive, filled with merchants, saloons, and laughter, but now it was a frozen skeleton, and the storm seemed to have claimed it as its own. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his tone low but insistent. She shook her head, brushing snow from her gown, the layers of silk and lace clinging to her trembling frame. Every detail of her dress shimmered against the icy light, almost unreal, like a painting in motion. "Come on," he said, tugging her toward the main street. "It's not safe here. Something's wrong." His words were laced with urgency, but he didn't explain, and she didn't ask. Something in his voice, in the set of his jaw and the intensity in his eyes, told her that she was in danger, and that this man, a stranger just moments ago, was now her only shield. They moved cautiously, each step leaving temporary prints in the thick snow. The wind seemed to bite harder as if warning them to turn back. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and she could feel the chill seep through even the thick layers of her gown. He kept a hand lightly on her back, guiding her forward, his other hand hovering near the small pistol at his hip. Suddenly, a shadow flickered across the edge of the street, and he froze. Her heart jumped into her throat. "What is it?" she whispered, clutching his coat tighter. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice tense. He took a slow step forward, eyes narrowing at the movement in the distance. There, barely visible through the swirl of snow, a figure darted between buildings, silent and purposeful. The man's hand went to the pistol, fingers brushing the cool metal. His stance was perfect, controlled, and unyielding. Who is that?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the howl of the storm. He didn't answer, only kept his gaze fixed, as if the world had narrowed down to that single shadow. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of ice beneath their boots and the distant groan of a timbered building swaying in the wind. Then, almost imperceptibly, the figure moved again, closer this time, and she caught a glimpse of the intent in the stranger's stance. He tightened his grip on her, whispering, "Stay close. Whatever comes, don't let go of me." Her mind raced. She didn't know this man. She didn't know the threat. And yet, a strange, undeniable trust anchored her to him. Her hands, icy and shaking, gripped his coat, feeling the warmth of his body and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Another gust of wind tore through the street, momentarily blinding them. When the snow cleared slightly, the figure was gone, vanished into the blizzard as if it had never been there. He lowered his hand slowly, scanning the area, eyes sharp and alert. "Too quiet," he muttered. "That's never good." She shivered, not from the cold alone. Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The wind snatched her words and carried them away before they could reach his ears. He finally looked at her, and in that brief moment, the storm seemed to fade from his gaze. "Someone who doesn't let people die alone," he said simply, a hint of a smile breaking through the tension. His eyes, dark and intense, held a depth she couldn't name. "Now come on. We have to move." As they continued down the snow-covered street, her gown brushing against the icy ground, she felt the first flicker of hope. Somehow, amidst the cold, the danger, and the unknown, she realized that she was no longer alone. The storm still raged around them, but for the first time, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with fire or shelter. It was the certainty that he was there, fighting for her, even against the frozen world. And as they disappeared into the swirling snow, the town watching silently from its empty streets, she understood one thing clearly: her life had just taken a turn she could never have imagined. A story of danger, of rescue, of something more, something forbidden and thrilling, was just beginning. The wind still screamed through the streets, rattling shutters and tossing flurries of snow into the air like tiny shards of glass. She wrapped her arms around herself, the silk and lace of her bridal gown doing little to protect her from the icy assault. Yet, with him by her side, a strange courage stirred within her. He moved with a careful, deliberate rhythm, boots crunching against the hardened snow, every glance and gesture calculated for survival. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice trembling as much from fear as from the cold. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned every alleyway, every window, every shadow. Then, finally, he spoke, low and measured. "Somewhere safe. For now." She nodded, trusting him instinctively. There was no time to question, no room to pause. She had learned quickly that in this frozen town, hesitation could mean death. The streets were deserted, yet every step carried the weight of unseen eyes, of danger lurking just out of sight. They turned a corner, and the snow suddenly seemed to thicken, a swirling wall of white that blinded and disoriented them. She stumbled again, her delicate heels sinking into the powder, and he caught her instantly, pulling her close. The warmth of his body was startling, grounding, and terrifying all at once. Her pulse raced, and she could feel the rapid beat echoing in her ears. "Hold on tight," he whispered, guiding her toward an old, abandoned stable at the edge of town. Its wooden doors were warped and frosted over, but it offered the only refuge for miles. Inside, the air was still, smelling faintly of hay and age. She allowed herself a small breath of relief, letting her body sink against his chest for just a moment. "You saved me," she said again, this time with a hint of wonder in her voice. The wind outside moaned as if echoing her disbelief. "I didn't have a choice," he replied, his voice soft but edged with resolve. He pulled back just slightly, enough to meet her eyes. "But don't get used to it. Danger isn't done with us yet." Her stomach twisted. She wanted to ask who he was, why he was here, why he cared, but words caught in her throat. All she could do was watch him, this stranger who seemed to know the snow, the town, the storm itself, as if it were his own shadow. A sudden noise outside made them both freeze. The wind carried the faintest scrape of metal on wood, and she could swear she heard a soft laugh, carried through the icy gusts. He immediately went to the door, hand hovering near the handle of his pistol. "Stay back," he ordered, his tone firm but calm. She obeyed, pressed against the wall, heart hammering. Through a crack in the stable door, she caught a glimpse of movement, a tall figure, wrapped in dark clothes, blending with the storm. Whoever it was, they were coming closer. He stepped forward, every muscle coiled like a spring, ready to strike. She watched, frozen and terrified, as he slowly opened the door, forcing the intruder into the dim light of the stable. The figure froze, revealing a young man, his face half covered by a scarf, eyes wide with shock. For a moment, it seemed the storm itself had paused to watch them. Then, in a blur of motion, the stranger lunged, not at him, but at her. Her scream cut through the cold, sharp as a knife. In an instant, he threw himself between them, catching her by the shoulders, twisting just enough to shield her. The intruder stumbled, lost balance, and fell hard into the snow outside. She gasped, trembling, clutching his coat like a lifeline. "Are you okay?" he asked, brushing snow from her shoulders. Her lips parted to speak, but no words came, only tears, hot against the cold, and the rapid rise and fall of her chest. She nodded finally, too overwhelmed to speak, too relieved to move. And in that brief, suspended silence, the world seemed to shrink around them, snow, wind, danger, and the fragile warmth between them. "Who was that?" she finally whispered, curiosity piercing through the fear. He didn't answer immediately, only scanned the streets, every sense alert. "Someone who shouldn't have seen you," he said at last. His eyes met hers, dark and steady. "And if they come back, we'll be ready." Her mind raced. Every instinct screamed that she should run, scream, hide, but a strange, undeniable pull kept her rooted to the spot. He was dangerous, yes, but in the only way that mattered, he was the only thing keeping her alive. Outside, the storm raged, and the snow continued to fall, relentless and blinding. Inside the stable, she felt the first flutter of something she hadn't expected, safety, trust, and perhaps something deeper, something forbidden that she didn't yet dare name. He moved to a corner, lighting a small lantern. The warm glow flickered against the walls, casting long, dancing shadows. She watched the light illuminate his features, sharp, strong, and undeniably handsome, framed by the storm outside and the chaos that followed them. "I don't even know your name," she murmured, almost ashamed of how much she trusted him already. He turned to her, expression softening just enough to show a hint of a smile. "Names don't matter right now," he said. "Only that you survive this night." For a moment, she allowed herself to believe him, to believe in the fragile safety he offered. And as the snow continued to fall outside, covering the town in a silent, icy blanket, she realized one terrifying, thrilling truth: the storm wasn't the only thing that could sweep her off her feet. This man, this dangerous, mysterious savior, already had. And somewhere, in the shadows beyond the stable walls, the threat that had chased them wasn't done yet. The night was far from over, and the story of love, danger, and survival had only just begun. The snowstorm had thickened, the wind now a relentless predator tearing at the edges of the abandoned town. She huddled close to him, her bridal gown soaked and clinging to her, every step leaving a trail in the fresh powder. Her fingers, numb from cold, still clutched his coat as if letting go meant surrendering to the storm, and to the unknown danger that still lurked beyond the stable walls. He moved quickly, boots crunching in the snow, his eyes scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement. "Stay behind me. Keep low," he ordered, his voice cutting through the howling wind like a knife. She obeyed instantly, trusting him with a certainty that terrified her. She didn't know who he was, or why he cared, but in that frozen, deserted town, he was all she had. They slipped through the streets like ghosts, snow whipping their faces, obscuring their path. Her breath came in sharp, visible clouds, and she shivered despite the warmth radiating from his body. Every sound, the creak of a shutter, the distant crash of falling timber, the faint crunch of another boot in the snow, made her heart leap. He moved with a predator's precision, guiding her around corners and through narrow alleys, keeping her out of sight from whatever, or whoever, was following them. Suddenly, the soft scrape of metal on wood echoed closer than before. He froze, pressing her back against a wall, and his hand went to the pistol at his hip. Her heart leapt into her throat. "They're close," he muttered, eyes narrowing. He pushed her behind a fallen barrel, snow piling around them, muffling their presence. "One wrong move, and they'll," his voice cut off as a shadow appeared, moving swiftly, silent, intent. Her eyes widened. The figure was fast, almost impossible to see through the storm, but he spotted it instantly. Without hesitation, he lunged, pulling her along, their bodies colliding with the snow-covered ground. A struggle erupted, the intruder's strength formidable, but he was stronger, faster, more determined. She watched, frozen, as the fight unfolded, heart pounding with fear and fascination. The wind carried no sound of the scuffle except their grunts and the scraping of boots on ice. Then, with a sudden, precise move, he threw the figure into a heap of snow, leaving them unconscious. Breathless, he helped her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" he asked, brushing snow from her hair and shoulders. She shook her head, too overwhelmed to speak, her pulse racing. She could feel the heat of his body, the steady beat of his heart, and the undeniable pull drawing her closer, even in the midst of chaos. They continued, moving faster now, urgency in every step. The streets of the abandoned town twisted and turned, buildings looming like silent sentinels in the storm. She stumbled again, and he caught her effortlessly, his hands firm yet gentle. "Careful," he warned, eyes scanning the darkness. "We're not safe yet." Her voice trembled. "Who are they? Who's after us?" He hesitated, a shadow crossing his expression. "Someone who wants something you carry, or something you know," he said finally, his tone clipped. "But we won't let them get it. Not tonight." Her mind spun. She didn't understand, couldn't understand, but the intensity in his eyes left no room for doubt. He was relentless, protective, and completely determined. And somehow, amidst the fear, the snow, and the danger, she found herself drawn to him, not just because he saved her life, but because he made her feel alive in a way the cold and the storm could never touch. They reached the edge of town, where the buildings thinned and the wilderness opened into a vast, snow-covered plain. The wind screamed louder here, colder, more ruthless, and her fingers went numb despite the layers of her gown and cloak. He pulled her close, shielding her from the worst of it, his eyes scanning the tree-line. "They're still out there," he said, voice low. "We need to move fast, or they'll circle us." She nodded, clinging to him as they ran, the snow crunching beneath their boots. The blizzard was merciless, but so was he, cutting a path through it with purpose and determination. Every glance he gave her was sharp, alert, protective, every movement precise. She felt a mix of awe and fear, the adrenaline of the chase coursing through her veins. Suddenly, the snow parted, and she saw a small cabin in the distance, smoke curling from its chimney. Hope surged within her. "There," she cried, pointing. He didn't hesitate. Together, they sprinted toward it, snow spraying around them, the storm lashing at their backs. She could barely see his face through the swirling white, but his presence was enough, an anchor in the chaos. They reached the cabin just as the storm seemed to intensify, as if the world itself were testing them. He kicked open the door, ushering her inside, and she collapsed against the threshold, panting, shivering, safe for the first time in what felt like hours. Inside, the cabin was small but warm, the glow of a fire illuminating the room. She sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, and he knelt beside her, still alert, still scanning the storm outside. The tension didn't leave him, but for a brief moment, the chaos outside seemed distant. "You're safe, for now," he said, finally allowing a small, almost imperceptible smile. She looked up at him, eyes wide, heart still racing, not just from fear, but from the undeniable connection that had formed between them in those frantic, snow-laden streets. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Just survive," he replied, his tone softening, almost tender, a stark contrast to the danger they had just endured. "That's enough." Outside, the blizzard raged, relentless and unforgiving, but inside that little cabin, amidst the warmth of the fire and the closeness of her mysterious protector, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. And perhaps, something more, something forbidden, thrilling, and dangerously irresistible. And as they sat there, catching their breath, both knew one truth: the night was far from over. Danger still lurked, mysteries remained unsolved, and the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that had begun between them, one that neither of them could ignore. The cabin trembled under the howling wind, snow battering the roof like 1,000 tiny fists. She pressed herself closer to him, her wet hair clinging to her cheeks, gown soaked and frozen stiff in places. For a moment, silence settled between them, just the crackle of the fire and the distant moans of the storm, but they both knew it wouldn't last. Danger had followed them, relentless, and it wasn't done yet. He stood, stretching to his full height, eyes scanning the small cabin. "We don't have much time," he said, voice sharp, commanding. "They'll find us before dawn if we stay here." She rose slowly, brushing snow from her gown, shivering despite the fire. "Then, what do we do?" she asked, voice barely audible. Her words trembled, but there was determination there, a spark that had grown stronger through the chase, through the fear, and through the brush with death. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We leave. Move fast. I know a place outside the town, safe, for now. But we need to act carefully." Her heart pounded, not just from fear, but from something else, something she couldn't quite name. The way he looked at her, the protective curve of his body, the fierce intensity in his eyes, it made her pulse race, made her feel alive in a way the storm never could. She nodded. "I'll follow you." Together, they slipped out into the blizzard, every step a battle against the wind and snow. The storm whipped around them, icy fingers tearing at their faces, but he kept her close, guiding, shielding, keeping the danger at bay. They moved quickly, silently, like shadows among shadows, leaving no trace except for the faintest prints in the snow. And then, suddenly, the storm seemed to still for a heartbeat, just long enough for her to see them. Figures emerging from the swirling white, relentless, determined, moving with deadly purpose. She gasped, clutching his arm. "They found us," she whispered. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed her hand, pulling her behind a snowdrift for cover. "Stay down," he hissed. His eyes glimmered in the dim light, calculating, precise. "They won't get us, if I can stop them." The intruders advanced, cloaked in black, weapons glinting through the snow. Every instinct in his body screamed danger, every muscle coiled for action. He moved like lightning, positioning himself between her and the threat. Time seemed to slow, the storm faded, leaving only the sound of his breath, the crunch of boots, the pounding of her heart. One of the figures lunged, and he met them head-on, striking with precision, forcing the attacker back into the snow. Another came from the side, but he pivoted, taking her hand and yanking her behind him. The cold cut through their clothes, but his focus never wavered, never faltered. She realized, in that terrifying, adrenaline-fueled moment, that she trusted him completely, not just to protect her life, but to survive this night with her. She saw his determination, his strength, his unwavering resolve, and in that instant, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before, hope. "Run with me," he shouted suddenly, dragging her toward a narrow passage between two collapsed buildings. Snow poured down around them, the storm blinding, but they moved like one, instincts in sync, hearts racing in tandem. The attackers pursued, but the terrain worked in their favor. He led her through a maze of alleyways and derelict buildings, jumping over debris, slipping on ice, always keeping her close. She stumbled, and he caught her effortlessly, their bodies pressed together as he pulled her upright. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met, and in the chaos, in the snow, in the fear, they shared a connection that went beyond words, beyond reason, beyond the blizzard itself. Finally, they reached the edge of the town, where the trees rose like dark sentinels against the storm. He paused, catching his breath, and turned to her. "One more stretch. Then we'll be safe, just a little further." Her lips trembled. I can't believe you saved me. Again. You'd do the same for me, if the roles were reversed." Her stomach fluttered at the thought. "I don't know if I could," she admitted, voice soft, almost shy. He reached out, tucking a strand of wet hair behind her ear, his gloved fingers brushing her cheek. "It's not about what you could. It's about what we do together. And then, with a silent understanding, they plunged into the trees, the snow biting at their faces, the cold numbing their limbs, but their determination unwavering. Behind them, the storm seemed to roar in frustration, but the intruders had slowed, unable to follow into the dense forest. After what felt like hours, but was only minutes, they emerged into a clearing, the wind finally easing, the snow thinning. A small cabin stood before them, smoke curling gently from its chimney. Safe at last, or at least, for now that he pulled her inside, brushing the snow from her gown, his hands lingering on her shoulders, his eyes scanning her face for signs of injury. She looked up at him, exhausted, terrified, exhilarated, and something else, something deep, unspoken, yet undeniable. "You made it," she whispered, sinking onto a bench, wrapping her arms around herself. He knelt beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, the steady beat of his heart. "We made it," he corrected gently. "And we'll stay alive, together." For a long moment, the silence of the cabin wrapped around them, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. She looked at him, truly looked, and saw not just the man who had saved her, but the one who had kept her hope alive, who had become her anchor in a world of snow, danger, and uncertainty. Slowly, carefully, she reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. Instead, he held it, a silent promise that neither the storm nor the world could break. And in that touch, she felt warmth, trust, and a connection deeper than words could express. Outside, the snow continued to fall, relentless and pure, covering the land in a blanket of white. But inside, the warmth between them grew, a fragile, flickering flame against the cold. Danger was still out there, there would always be danger in a world like theirs, but for now, they were together, and that was enough. And as the fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls, she realized the truth she had denied herself for too long. Love, fierce and unyielding, had found her in the most unlikely place, a stormy night, a snow-covered town, and in the arms of a man who had risked everything to save her. The night was far from over, the world still harsh and unforgiving, but in that moment, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: as long as they were together, they could face whatever the storm, or life itself, threw their way.